Well, hello, and happy Thursday. It is wonderful to have you join me. I hope that you're having a great day. And if you're watching us here on the replay, welcome to the show. We're currently live, and I'm excited to welcome you to today's live Level Up conversation.
Welcome to Level Up with Winnie Sun. Market updates. Award-winning financial pro. Get ready. I present to you Level Up with Winnie Sun.
Hello, friends, and welcome back. What a treat. I am Winnie Sun, as noted, and I am your host today, Forbes contributor, CNBC council member, and an award-winning financial pro, here to keep you on top of relevant, trending business news. Business news that you can use. But most importantly, as you know, you're part of today's discussion, and it always is an honor to have you joining us. So thank you so much for making the time and being with us here. Now, if you're watching me live, don't be shy. Jump in, let me know what city or what state you're joining us from. And of course, let me know how your day is going. I want to know, because it's great to have you here with us. Today we have a very, very special show because we have a special guest. He's the executive vice president of Saffron Road Foods, and he's going to share with you his thoughts on how best to plan and thrive through these very challenging times. But before we jump to him, here's how the market closed today. I wish I had better news. I said that yesterday if you were with us yesterday, but unfortunately the Dow closed down 739 points today, and the Nasdaq closed down 453 points, and the S&P down 122 points. But believe it or not, the Dow was actually down even more earlier today. In fact, at one point, the Dow was close to down over 900 points. It was incredible. It's now closed the lowest point in a year. That's right. Now, why is that? Well, investors, unfortunately, were still skittish about yesterday's Federal Reserve announcement towards their anti-inflation policy and sending here the U.S. economy into recessionary levels. Are we in a recession? Are we close to a recession? The question is, does it really matter if we actually touched it? Because we certainly feel like we're in a recession already. Now, the shock came down after the central bank yesterday said it's going to be increasing interest rates by 0.75%. Now, this is, as you know, the largest hike in 28 years, making a lot of impact. Impacting one area in particular has been the travel industry. Now, you may have flown recently, you may have traveled recently. I certainly haven't, but if you have, you may have noticed that airfare is almost at sky high levels. In fact, I know I've been talking to several friends looking to plan trips over the fall, over the winter, next year, and prices definitely are quite high. Not only are they high, but now planes are also packed. And so there's also less COVID testing for international arrivals now. All these things should actually improve travel, but unfortunately they haven't, because inflation has caused many customers and consumers to reconsider whether they need that high price ticket or vacation. Perhaps that money should be better spent on other things. We don't know, but a lot of households are making those decisions as we speak. Now, as you know, the consumer price index is mostly driven by sort of three perceptions of their inflation measure, that being food, energy, and shelter. Combined, they make about 54% of the consumer price index. So households are wondering, how do I really navigate this time? How am I going to make sure that I'm going to be able to take care of my family, of food costs, medication costs, shelter costs? What am I going to do? Well, fortunately, we have a very special guest joining us. Jack, welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm very good. Thanks so much for having me, Winnie. It's a pleasure.
Well, thank you so much for being here. I think you're going to be offering a lot of good information for us today. Jack, I just know that this is probably a time where your team, I'm sure, has struggled just like everyone else's team, family going through inflation as well as our families, right? But let's talk about your bio. I think this is impressive, and I was really grateful to have you on the show. So you are one of the earliest members of the team to join the Journey to Better, and I know you feel strongly that Saffron Road offers a unique opportunity for a brand that not only appeals to those consumers whose spiritual principles guide their dietary needs, but also a brand that stands for good stewardship of the planet. This is a big thing. I know we talked about this on the show. And now you're the architect of the company's brand, and tireless in offering sort of the right name for every offering. So thank you so much for being here. I know you're an accomplished food executive, and you successfully built two of the fastest growing startups in the natural food business, which now deliver well over 50 million in sales. I gotta tell you, Jack, a lot of these names of these companies I have had in the last few years, I've enjoyed quite a bit. Terra chips. I know anybody who's
Mhm.
flown on JetBlue, you know how amazing Terra chips are. Alexia Foods as well. Those are in my freezer as we speak as well. So you've really made a movement, and you've done so much for so many households. So Jack, let's talk. Welcome. And how did it all start? I love to start there. If you could share with us sort of your own personal backstory.
Well, sure. Well, I got started working and in business very young. I owned my own business when I was 16. Didn't happen to be a food business. It was a lifeguard business, but that kind of got me started. And very soon it became clear to me that I wanted to also work and try to succeed in the music business. And I set off in that when I was 20, 21 years old, and tried that and had some level of success early on. And when I hit, in essence, a wall in 1990 in the music business, it happened to be right when the woman who I was managing in the music business, who we had a record deal on Geffen Records, and things had looked great, but at that point, not so great. And her husband was one of the two creators of Terra Chips, and they needed somebody to help them out to do sales. They'd never done sales before, worked with people in that way, and so I stepped right into that role, and haven't looked back since. Really, it's been an amazing ride over the last 32 years.
Wow, that's incredible, Jack. So you went from music to food. I mean, two of the probably most popular industries. So I think you made good choices there. Amazing. Well, let's talk about this. And I think many of us can relate. The pandemic has certainly turned many of our businesses, our households upside down. I'm curious, you've been part of such successful businesses. How has the pandemic impacted your business?
Well, it's certainly turned many of our processes upside down. It's ultimately been good for us because of how we've navigated through it as a team, and it really, I mean, that's one of the first and strongest things that we've taken away from this is really to have the right team to support every function of the business has been so important for us. A lot of the folks that are on board really learned a good amount of what they're doing in the company. They started and didn't necessarily understand their jobs that much when they started, and we were able to train them and bring them in. And so they really understand our business in a way that people coming in from the outside might not understand that. And so going back to those early days, because it's been so many different chapters that we've gone through it in business, and certainly the country has as well. Very early on, you could see what was happening in Europe, and the way that grocery stores were being affected there. And this goes into late December, early January, things that were happening, and we stocked up. We filled our freezers, our big freezers, with a lot of product to get ready for what was potentially coming, and did ultimately come. And that first part, when people went crazy at the grocery stores and wiped the shelves clean, it was a very difficult time for everyone. It was very difficult for us because we felt somewhat powerless, because we had plenty of product, but the distribution channel that was getting to the stores was not able to keep up. And obviously, the trucks were needed for toilet paper and paper towels and all that stuff that people were buying a lot of at that time. And it took about 6 to 8 weeks for that all to sort out and get going. When that happened, we just kept making food throughout that entire time, and stocking up and getting ready for hiccups, which there's been plenty since then. And over that time, once we moved through and got into, say, the late summer of 2020 and into the fall, and there was the talk of vaccines, and we saw vaccines coming, and the brighter light, we expected things to kind of settle out, but they really haven't. We know Delta and Omicron came along, and people pretty locked into some significant life changes in terms of how they were eating, what they were doing, and what they weren't doing, and staying at home, and really finding a way to have that balance of convenience sometimes with something like a frozen entree that we make here at Saffron Road, or cooking at home. One of the things that I don't think people do that much of anymore is cook sourdough and bake sourdough, but they're still eating a lot of food at home, and they always want a convenient option to have at a moment's notice.
Absolutely. Convenience is key, right, Jack? And
Yep.
I agree with you. I think, I was just talking to a client recently. I haven't spent so much time shopping for groceries until the last couple of years. It never becomes such a huge part of our lives. But I want to take just a moment to welcome so many of our audience members here. We have Vicky joining us from Facebook Live. Vicky, thank you so much for being here. Always appreciate you. Patricia, also joining us from Facebook Live. Thank you, Sadiq, joining us on YouTube Live, and Joshua joining us from YouTube. Thank you, everybody, for being here and letting us know. I think this is a very important discussion. So I want to come back. So, Jack, obviously the pandemic had dramatic impact on your business. Fortunately, like you said, you had a lot of goods, but you just couldn't get it to consumers quickly because of transportation issues. So let me ask you about this. So what plans did you put in place to ensure that you could keep up with supply chains to consumers? I know you had stock ready. What if this happens again? Is the company ready?
Well, so some of that is out of our hands because typically we do sell some of our customers direct into their warehouses, and that was fairly smooth for us to the degree that they could restock their shelves. But as a natural foods company, like many others out there, we use third-party distributors to get to a lot of the supermarkets, and especially the supernatural food stores and the like that we're in. And that's where a lot of the pain happened at that time. And hopefully, if this happens again, people will understand a little better what not to do. And that hoarding that took place, it helped very few people, and it hurt a lot because the people, I don't think anybody that bought a, a lot of toilet paper actually ended up needing it when they thought they did, and it just kept it from other people from getting it. And then to recycle and get those shelves stocked again, it just really put a wrench in a lot of people's plans for a while. So to stay away from that, we would like to see that happen as we go forward. But once we got beyond that, it's really been the key since, say, early summer, late spring of 2020. We've always had the amount of food. Our in stock rate over this time has been 99.5%, which is pretty much unheralded and unknown in the frozen food business right now. There's so many things that affect it, whether it be inbound ingredients, especially us. We have ingredients that come from abroad, from Thailand and so forth, from India, that where there have been hiccups coming in, but we have had second supplies to make sure that we can get those ingredients in. Then having the labor to do it is a whole separate issue. Once you get to the facility, making sure that the people are there to work, making sure they're healthy, and that they can get the food made. Obviously, labor issues and pricing and wages have been a big factor even before this current inflationary environment we're in at this moment. That was there in the early stages of the pandemic. And then a whole separate issue of having enough trucks to some degree to get it out, but supply and demand coming into play. A lot of demand for those trucks, very few truck drivers. And as a result, freight rates going very, very high, whether it be for containers coming into the country or just trucks going from one state to the other. And then because there's so much more business happening in food, getting stocked up or backed up at the warehouses, and long lines of trucks waiting to unload. So it's just a ripple effect that has rippled through everything. And this is where you see a lot of change happening in the way that especially the big thinkers and big companies are thinking about inventory. There was so much time spent over the last 20 years talking about just-in-time inventory, which with the technology that exists and stable buying patterns was helped increase profits quite a bit. And that is ultimately what was the downfall in the early stages of the pandemic, and still somewhat to this day, is was very little slack in the system to take unprecedented demand like this. And of course, you can only have, by definition, so much unprecedented demand. So it'll be really interesting to see, maybe 5 years out, or hopefully even a little less, how the new normal looks in terms of how folks look at their inventory, how much inventory is kept in the system, because obviously inventory is money and it shows up on your balance sheet, and it's not in your bank account.
Yep.
And so it's a very big business conundrum that a lot of folks will be working out as we work through the situation we're in right now.
Yeah, and it's certainly we haven't worked through it, and you're absolutely right, Jack. One thing I'm curious, and I'd like to hear from you, Jack, is when we think about inflation, when we think about the pandemic, we think about like supply chain issues. Obviously, there's a reason why prices are so high today, right? And
Yep.
you named off quite a few things that definitely we know had a dramatic impact. But talk about the industry that you're in. I mean, natural foods, isn't that typically in the supermarket a higher priced item, right? So isn't that consumer maybe a little bit more insulated from day-to-day price fluctuations? But now it's been, quite some time past. Now we're talking about over 8%, and groceries probably even higher. Are you seeing impact now?
We are yet to see an impact ourselves. We have had to raise our prices actually for the first time in 12 years. And actually, in some retailers over that time, we were able to reduce our prices from when we launched back in 2010. And until October of 2021, we had not taken a price increase on our frozen entrees. And so it's been an interesting time for us. We've watched it very carefully. We do typically have a higher income consumer, but everyone does come into our product. We work very hard to make it affordable to everyone, because we know that the tenants that we have, whether it be that our chicken and beef is raised without antibiotics and humanely raised, it is halal certified as well. Most of our items are gluten free, and we work very hard to provide a nutritious and healthy, delicious meal. So you'd be surprised the breadth of folks that do buy our products when they can. And so we work very hard to maintain that. But that time is, we have to keep going as a business, and we have to cover these dramatic increases that we've been seeing from all those items I just mentioned, whether it be chicken or freight or
Mhm.
rice or you name it. Every single thing has gone up dramatically in the last year.
They have gone up dramatically. It's so interesting. It's like across the board. Like it's crazy. I've never paid attention, Jack, to the cost of chicken like we have
Hmm.
recently, and that relates to like all items. I know everybody feels that. I've had so many conversations with people saying like, I cannot believe how much I'm paying for groceries today. Just like they're saying, I can't believe how much I'm paying for gas today. And it only seems to like it's going to continue. And certainly the reflection that we see in today's market reflects the fear and concerns that today's consumer has. Now,
Hmm.
you know, it's interesting. One thing that I remember, this was sort of early on in the pandemic, where people were rushing to find another freezer, another refrigerator. You talked about people wanting to hoard toilet paper, but I also know that a lot of people felt like they needed to get themselves more storage to buy things in case
Hmm.
they couldn't go out and they didn't feel safe enough to go out. So, with more households, I guess more freezers in house and people's households, do you see this frozen category growth sustaining its momentum in years to come? Do you think people are going to navigate more to fresh? Are they going to go back to eating at restaurants at the same level? So what do you predict to happen to this category? Because I think it's important because it kind of tells us about the state of where the economy is.
Well, the underlying dynamic that you talked about in terms of increased frozen food consumption, I think will continue. There'll obviously be some other factors that play into that. But one thing that the pandemic did help a lot of folks understand is actually how good frozen foods can be, and oftentimes better than any alternative that's out there, whether it be vegetables that or fruits that have everything locked in at the moment that they were harvested, as opposed to sitting around and losing those during the time that they're transported to the store. To the way that food is frozen these days really does lock in everything, and you can warm it up and not have it be mushy the way that it was. I don't know. I am a little older than maybe some of your listeners, but I don't remember that in frozen food. So a lot of folks have been exposed to it and seeing exactly how good it can be. So I think that will continue for frozen foods. We'll see some changes in consumer behavior. Certainly, what I've known in my own life and been able to witness around in the last few months, people certainly have wanted to go out to eat and do that sort of thing. Unfortunately, I have a suspicion that we're kind of entering a different kind of a lockdown coming up in the next few months here as these financial situation kind of settles in, and folks are going to be watching what they're spending, and they're still looking for a restaurant quality meal that can satisfy what they're looking for. World cuisines, kind of think about traveling around the world if you can't afford to do it exactly at this moment or don't feel safe doing it. And we offer all of that that's happening. Long term, people are what we already saw is people do want to go out to restaurants, and I think that will. I think we did lose some restaurants forever in this, unfortunately, just like we lost some food manufacturers that didn't make it through. But the ones that did make it through are stronger and better for it.
And better for it. That's good. That's good to hear. We like to hear people going through difficult times, but getting through it and becoming stronger and better businesses. So, I know you've run some very successful startups, Jack. I'd love to get some of your advice. Maybe talk about the biggest lessons that you've learned, and what can other startups do um, from the success that you've had, that you've learned during these tough times that maybe we can share.
Well, having been in the entrepreneurial side of the food business all of my career, I've never really had access to a lot of the data and studies and research that the big companies get to do. And what we've I think it's not an exaggeration to say that the last 2.5 years have been unprecedented. And when you go through unprecedented times, there is no research or data that you can do to really help you through it because no one's gone through it before.
Mhm.
And so, really building a good trust in yourself and the ability to understand what needs to be done in times like this is something that entrepreneurs have had to do their entire lives, their entire careers, because they've not been able to rely on many of those other tools that are available to them. And so, as much as possible, if people have a stomach for it, I highly recommend working for small companies that have to be creative in how they go about things, because it's to the way that I see it, it's so much more of a fun life to be in, and sometimes it's very challenging, but
Mm.
at the end of the day, it's a much more rewarding life to be in.
Yeah, that's true. Running small businesses, staying creative, being nimble is certainly a very rewarding life. So thank you so much, Jack, for sharing that. You know what? I think I see our friend Joshua Crossex Fighter joining us from YouTube Live, and this is actually his favorite segment. So I think it's time for speed round.
Speed round.
So, Jack, thank you so much for being here. This is a fun part. We get to ask you two questions. I'm going to give you about 2 minutes, Jack. You ready?
Mhm.
Okay, great. So the first question we have for you, obviously you've run some very successful business and continue to do so. So I'm sure you have some great business advice. So I'm asking you if you could share with us the best business advice that you've actually been given.
Sure. It was a little tough to hear when I heard it. And I mentioned earlier how I'd been in the music business and then came over and was with Terra Chips. And there was a time when things were going fine at Terra Chips, but an opportunity arose to get back into the music business. And it's really where I thought I wanted to be, because I felt like I had failed there before. So anyway, a friend of mine told me, he said, "Look, you've already built this really good career in food. I don't see why you would want to give that up now, because you have a bright future ahead of you here, and stick with it." And that was the best advice I've ever had.
I love it. I love it. Yeah. So sometimes, we almost have sentimental feelings, right, Jack, for our previous careers, but where you are is where you were meant to be. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. All right, Jack, this is another question that I want to ask you. And, we, of course, our podcast is now called the Yes Factor, that's shared on LinkedIn Podcast Network. So, a really exciting time for us. And we believe that everyone has their own Yes Factor. Some people call it a superpower. We call it Yes Factor. What would you say that, Jack, yours is?
I would say that my yes factor is humor, because it keeps me humble. Sometimes when I need to be humble, notice that I said sometimes, not all the times, but it also helps to break some of those stressful times that I just talked about that happen. And it just, without, if you're not smiling, then what's the point? Is kind of the way that I feel.
I love that. If you're not smiling, what's the point? And Vicky is saying that's soul food for you, Jack. That is true. Thank you, Vicky, for sharing that. Absolutely. Well, it's such a treat to meet you, Jack, and thank you so much for your time. And I gotta say, I'm appreciative of you because I do know we had to reschedule your interview because of what happened in Texas just a couple
Hmm.
weeks ago. And so thank you so much for being flexible and understanding. I've been following Jack for some time on Twitter and just was such a fan of him, just a good human. So thank you, Jack, for all that you do. And thank you for making the time today. Thank you so much, my friends, for being here and watching the show, supporting our program, of course. You are always so appreciated, and I can't tell you that enough. And as you know, I'm going to ask you this because I always ask you, please take a moment to share the show with those that you care about. And as a reminder, you can find full episodes of Level Up with Winnie Sun on NASDAQ, the KBCW, Amazon Fire, Roku, and many other places. And of course, don't forget Yes Factor, which is now on the LinkedIn Podcast Network and pretty much everywhere you tune into podcasts. And with that, thank you so much, Jack, for your time. And thank you, all of you, for being here. And I can't wait to see all of you again tomorrow.
Thanks, Winnie.